What if a single bloodline survived longer than the pyramids, older than Egypt itself, hidden in plain sight for over 13,000 years? Deep in the Horn of Africa, something extraordinary exists in the DNA of Somali people, something scientists never expected to find. While families tell stories of noble Arab ancestors who crossed the sea, their genes whisper a completely different truth. A truth that reaches back to the late Stone Age. Nearly 80% of Somali men carry an identical genetic marker, passed from father to son across centuries. One ancient man changed everything. His descendants became a nation, but here's what nobody saw coming. This lineage didn't come from Arabia at all. Scientists discovered haplogroup EM78, a genetic thread stretching back 13,500 years. It's not rare, it's dominant, woven into the very fabric of Somali identity. Somewhere in the distant past, one founder's children spread across the Horn until their DNA became the backbone of an entire people. This lineage didn't build temples or leave golden masks behind, but it left something far more powerful, a signature encoded in human flesh. Look at La Scale, painted cattle, dancing figures, red ochre hands reaching across time. These aren't decorations, they're declarations. Proof that a culture existed long before the pharaohs ruled. Then there's the Herto skull, over 160,000 years old, unearthed in the same region. A face that might have looked familiar, even Somali, while the world looked north to Egypt for glory. A parallel legacy thrived in the shadows, unwritten but never undone. But who were these people, really? This bloodline didn't stay still. Someone came from the outside, not to conquer, but to merge. Because while this DNA is ancient, it's not pure. There's another story buried in Somali genes, one that doesn't begin in Africa, but ends there. To find it, we have to follow a migration no history book ever taught us, the one that turned around and came back. Roughly 23,000 years ago, long before farming, before cities, before recorded time, something strange happened. A group of humans turned around. They crossed back over the Red Sea and vanished into Africa's genetic memory. No monuments, no languages left behind. Just a ripple, faint but permanent, in the DNA of those who would one day call themselves Somali. Scientists call it the Ethio-Somali component. It's not Arab, it's not European, it's something older, something that split from Eurasia long before nations had names. And what researchers discovered next changed everything. Hodgson's study, in 2014, cracked it open. They found this ancestry hiding in plain sight, a ghost lineage, Paleolithic, deeply foreign, yet fully blended into the Horn. It's not visible on the face, you wouldn't notice it in the skin, the accent, the clothing, but in the genes, it speaks loudly. A second source buried in the first. And here's what's truly haunting. It came before cattle, before agriculture. These weren't bronze-clad warriors or wandering merchants. These were ancient hunter-gatherers, maybe from the Levant, maybe from the Nile's upper reaches, people who moved with the climate, with the stars, and yet they stayed. They mixed, not as conquerors, but as kin. Their genes joined with those already rooted in the Horn, creating a new people, a new story, one part Africa, one part returning stranger. They didn't build cities, no inscriptions, no legacy written in stone. But their legacy is written in blood. So who led them? 5,000 years ago, one man changed everything. He wasn't a king. There are no crowns in the soil, no thrones in the dust. But he came with cattle, with rhythm in his footsteps, and dust on his skin. He wasn't alone. A wave of Neolithic pastoralists moved through the Horn, herding goats and camels, bringing a new way to live and a new legacy to leave behind. In their blood, something remarkable happened. A single Y chromosome, EM35 cluster gamma, began to spread quietly at first, then suddenly, everywhere. Generation by generation, father to son, it took root. Today, nearly 80% of Somali men carry it. Not a myth, not a metaphor. One ancient man became the genetic patriarch of an entire nation. Imagine that, one man's lineage echoing through centuries. His sons shaped clans. His grandsons led migrations. His great-grandsons gave rise to names still spoken today. This wasn't just adaptation or survival, it was consolidation. You can still see it etched into the rock walls of La Scale. Painted figures, cattle in procession, arms raised in ceremony. They were preserving more than food. They were preserving identity. But something else was happening quietly. While the men passed down names and power, Another legacy, quieter and older, was being carried forward. Not in the Y chromosome, but in the womb. Not all legacy is loud. Some is carried in silence, passed not by sword or ceremony, but by breath, by birth. While founding fathers marked territory and built clans, it was the mothers who kept the soul alive, and their story is written in mitochondrial code, passed only from mother to child. mtDNA doesn't fade, it whispers through generations, untouched by the father's line, a quiet, uninterrupted thread from the beginning of time. And in Somali women, that thread is ancient. 60% of Somali maternal DNA is sub-Saharan, rooted in Africa, untouched by conquest. It tells us this: while men moved, trading, herding, migrating, the women stayed. They held the land, the language, the lineage. They weren't named in the scrolls. Their tombs weren't gilded. But genetically, they outlasted every storm. Al-3, Al-2, M1. These are echoes of the very first migrations. But memory alone doesn't define identity, because something unexpected was reaching southward. A kingdom obsessed with wealth, with ritual, with mystery. Ancient Egypt was reaching toward the Horn, and what it found was the Land of Punt, the land of the gods, the land of incense. They called it mystical, sacred, overflowing with gold, ivory, ebony, and the most prized offering of all, myrrh. And so, across the Red Sea, the ships came. But what if this wasn't just trade? What if Egypt was visiting family? In 2020, researchers examined mummified baboons from Egyptian tombs, royal animals revered in death, preserved in temples, and their isotopes, their DNA, matched the Somali-Eritrean coast. Not vaguely, not maybe, precisely. Those baboons had come from the Horn, and suddenly myth became memory. The Land of Punt wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. It was Somalia, Eritrea, the Red Sea's southern cradle, and the genetic trail runs both ways. Haplogroup M1, a maternal lineage, appears in both ancient Egyptians and modern Somalis. So does EM35, the same paternal line that shaped Somali clans. Coincidence or continuity? Were Egyptians trading with their genetic cousins? This wasn't conquest, it was kinship. But just as Egypt looked south, something else was stirring on the opposite shore. They didn't come with armies. They came with script, with carved stone tablets, incense caravans, and ancient tongues chiseled into the cliffs of the Somali coast. Around 800 BCE, the Red Sea shimmered with something new, the sails of Sabaean traders from South Arabia, drawn not by conquest, but by curiosity, commerce, and kinship. This wasn't invasion, it was invitation. Temples rose along the shore, not grand, not gilded, but unmistakably foreign. Inscriptions in ancient South Arabian script were etched into Somali stone, a language not born of the Horn, but now breathing in it, and in the bloodlines, a shift began. Haplogroup TM184 appeared. Subtle at first, tucked into the genealogies of northern Somali clans, especially those of the Deer lineage, whose oral histories echo with whispers of sea-crossing forefathers. But here's the twist: not conquerors, but collaborators. The Somali genome didn't bend. It integrated. These newcomers weren't builders of empire here. They were absorbed into one already rooted. Arabia may have brought trade, inscriptions, even minor lineages, but it didn't bring dominance. Yet, even as these Arabian traces settled into the bones of the coast, something else was preparing to cross the sea. Not a language, not a lineage, but a belief. When Islam crossed the Red Sea, it didn't come quietly. It came with conviction, with verses, with scholars, with sheikhs claiming descent from the Prophet himself. And Somalia opened its doors, not to conquerors, but to brothers in faith. Cities like Zayla and Mogadishu became gateways. Mosques rose from coral stone. New calendars began. Somali clans embraced Islam, not at the edge of a sword, but at the heart of a story. A new story, one of divine origin, noble Arab forefathers, spiritual prestige, and soon every lineage seemed to echo with the same claim: Arab descent. Sheikh Ishaq, Sheikh Darod, names carried with pride, passed from father to son, not just bloodlines, but identities. But the DNA tells a quieter story. The Jo1 haplogroup, the marker most associated with Arabian males, appears in just 3% of Somali men, just 3%. The rest, still EM35, still TM184, still the lineages of the Horn. Even after centuries of religious transformation, the genome barely flinched. Hodgson's study confirmed it. 95% of Somali autosomal DNA remains unchanged, rooted in the ancient Ethio-Somali blend. So what does that mean? It means belief moved faster than blood. Culture shifted. Faith took hold. But under the skin, the story stayed the same. And that reveals something astonishing about identity itself. Over 70% of Somali men, from the coast to the highlands, from north to south, carry nearly identical Y chromosomes. Not just the same haplogroup, but the same haplotype, the same male fingerprint, passed down through generations like a sealed scroll. This is not normal. In most countries, centuries of war, migration, and marriage scattered the genetic deck. But in Somalia, it's as if one lineage drew the line, and history followed it. Why? Because culture reinforced what DNA started: clan-based endogamy. The tradition of marrying within locked in that genetic core. And so, despite waves of trade, faith, and contact, the Somali genome remained tightly coiled around itself, one ancient spark still burning in a modern people. Compare Somali DNA to that of Egyptians, Arabs, West Africans, and the contrasts are immediate, not just in skin tone or language, but in the code. The Arabian Peninsula, with its J1 signature, barely echoes in Somali blood. Despite centuries of shared religion, trade, even claimed descent, the genes don't match. But look closer to home, and the pattern sharpens. Somalis cluster genetically with the Oromo, the Afar, the Beja. Not just neighbors by geography, but kin in the deepest sense. The Horn didn't receive history, it made it. But one question still haunts every marker, every lineage. Where are the ancient Somali bones?